Welcome to the Fierce and Fit Mentor Podcast. I'm your host, 𝗕𝗲𝘁, a holistic health coach dedicated to helping women over 40 achieve their fittest, fiercest selves. Each week, we'll dive deep into the unique challenges of menopause, including belly fat, weight gain, muscle building, hormonal imbalances, and more. These episodes are recorded live from my free Facebook group, Fierce Women Sculpting Powerful Bodies and Champion Mindsets. Be sure to check the link in the show notes to join our incredible community and access free content, challenges, and resources designed just for you. Awesome. If you are just joining, this is the live on flat stomach after 40, 50, and 60, the truth about belly fat. So this is a very, very hot topic, and I am excited about it, but my voice may not hold up. I've been drinking a lot of tea because my throat started really hurting yesterday. So let's hope that this will actually hold up. Okay, so we're just gonna get started here. This is the Fierce Woman community where we sculpt powerful bodies and champion mindsets. This community is dedicated to perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause women who are trying to understand their bodies. Now, obviously this is for women who are going through different stages in their menopause or perimenopause stages. And we want to address different parts of the changes in your body. So there's going to be symptomatic things that you experience as you go into menopause, like physical symptoms like mood swings, less energy, night sweats, or hot flashes, or poor sleep. But we also want to, yes, I see Oshone, I see Angela, awesome. I see the hellos, awesome. We also want to address more permanent shifts that happen in your body, like losing muscle and gaining abdominal fat. So this is what today's live is about, because this is by far our most popular topic. I feel like it's not the sexiest, because when you say belly fat, nobody is like, ooh, like muscle's like sexier, but belly fat is a real like concern. Over 5 years that I've been specializing in the menopausal health industry, this is by far, and I know Oshone knows and Debbie knows, this is by far most popular topic, because most women in their menopause stages are experiencing increased abdominal fat. So I want all of you who are listening right now to tell me, like, have you seen yourself struggle more with belly fat as you have aged? So put belly fat below if you're like, yes, that's me. And I can guarantee you that most women, maybe outside of 𝗕𝗵𝗁, but even 𝗕𝗵𝗁 has a little bit, right? She has a little bit at times. So I want the ones who are listening here, tell me, do you see yourself increasing in abdominal fat over the years as you've aged? This is a real situation that happens as you age, right? So this is going to be majority of women. It's only rare I'll meet someone who doesn't struggle with belly fat as they age. Okay, so Cherie says that, Debbie, Angela, Pam, exactly. So this is going to be super relevant to you. And I'm going to start obviously by saying, anytime I do these lives, you know that I am like a science geek, and I love like very deep science beyond what you could even wrap your head around, with like all the different names and complexities within the cellular structure and everything. But it's I had to simplify this one too, because it was like, this is going to be 3 hours if I don't stop this. Okay, so just know that the topic of belly fat, if it's this complex that I cannot get it in about 90 minutes of a presentation, it's complex. Okay, there's a lot happening where I have to be like, nope, we're gonna save this for another live or something like that. So first of all, you have to understand belly fat is extremely complex in your body. And that's why I said it on my teaser, that it is not just calories or macros. And the simplification of I just need to lose weight is slightly incorrect, okay? Because there's a lot going on with the body. So the thing I want all of you guys to understand is that There's a lot of theory in today's lives. There's going to be some names, some things that I'm going to say, you're like, well, that goes through my head. Like, that's a lot, Clarice. But I want you to understand that over 5 years of coaching women specifically in this area, I've been a coach and trainer for 15 years. But the last 5 years has been the most intense in menopausal health, particularly belly fat. So to drop belly fat off multiple women from 40, 50, 60 to 70, there is a formula, like I said, and I want you guys to keep this in mind, okay? There has to be a step-by-step approach and to understand how belly fat works because it's extremely complex. So I need you guys to start with the right mindset is first of all, there is no magic solution. There's not a pill you can take to be like, I'm going to drop belly fat. It's not, I'm going to take a hormone therapy and I'm going to drop my belly fat. It's not, I'm going to eat less. I'm going to drop my belly fat. And it's not going to be, I work out harder and I drop my belly fat. Okay. Why I'm very strong about this is because there's a lot of messaging out there that says like, oh, if you do this or you take this shake, you're going to drop belly fat. But very rarely, and I think it's this cross. Like, I think there are researchers and scientists who understand this area very well, but to be able to teach is another thing. And I think that I combine the two. I'm very deep in the research, but I also have the ability to teach it. And this is where I want you guys to be like, okay, like this is a really different game. It's not one thing that's going to change your belly fat, but multiple factors, as you will understand as I describe about the situation of your belly fat. Okay. Yeah. Stephanie Smith says difficult to drop. So, as a starting point, I want you guys to think about this. So, a flatter stomach after 40 is not just about more ab workouts, eating less, but it's about reducing visceral fat. Okay. So you need to think if I want to have a really nice stomach as I age, the key is to reduce the visceral fat. And this is the type of fat that is stored around the organs behind your abdominal wall. And this visceral fat behaves differently from your softer subcutaneous fat in front. So the visceral fat is more hormonally active, more inflammatory. We're going to go into the reasons of this, but I'm just giving you the overarching view, right? More hormonally active, more inflammatory, more linked to insulin resistance, fatty liver, cardiovascular diseases, and postmenopausal belly fat patterns, meaning distribution to the center. Okay, so there's a lot of things with visceral fat. Now, like I said, there's two types of fat in your abdominal region. You have the one on the surface. Okay, so subcutaneous fat is the type of fat that sits on the surface and you can grab it. Okay, so those of you look down, can you grab your fat? Okay, if you can grab or pinch it, this is subcutaneous fat, and it is not as dangerous as visceral fat, but it still indicates certain things. So if you have the surface level fat, it still indicates things like lack of tone. Maybe you're not working out enough in terms of understand how to produce better tone. It could indicate inflammation in your body, and maybe just not understanding like caloric things and all of that. So a lot of times when people are younger, they struggle more with subcutaneous fat. And you notice that when you're younger, you can also lose that fat faster because they're on the surface. Okay. So if you eat too much, drink too much beer when you're younger or something, you might notice a little bit like above, but it's easy to drop it off. Right. So you want to think that subcutaneous fat is a little bit easier to drop off. If you can pinch it, that is, I mean, it's not great, but at least it's not visceral fat. Okay. So, but there's a second type, and the second type is you cannot actually grab it. And this is where it's tricky. Okay. There are women who tell me that I don't have that much fat. I ask them what their waist circumference is, and they figure it out or tell me 37 inches, 38 inches, but they're not grabbing fat in front of them. They're just a lot thicker. And I know Kat and I had this conversation about thicker waistline and stuff like that. So when you see, if you cannot grab the fat, but you're thicker in your waistline, you're most likely struggling with visceral fat. It's when you get thicker and thicker. Okay, so now I'm going to give you some clinical numbers. Okay, so like supported by research. Okay, so the healthy waistline needs to sit about 31.5 inches or below. Okay, or that's about 80 centimeters or below. So if you have a waistline, like for example, Leslie Bennett, I dropped her from 37 inches to 27 inches. She went from metabolically unhealthy to metabolically healthy because her waistline dropped 10 inches off. If you have a waistline that is 31.5 to 34.5, you are at an increased metabolic risk, more risky. Okay. And so you need to be aware. Okay. And if you have a waistline that is 34.5 or higher, you are at a very high risk, and visceral fat is almost definitely involved. So I want all of you to think about this. What is your waistline? So if you guys can be, I don't know if you recently measured, but all my clients would have measured, they would know. Now, let's talk about the reasons why visceral fat tends to increase with age. We're going to talk about 5 overlapping reasons. Okay, so 5 overlapping reasons. So the first reason why visceral fat increases with age is what I spoke about last week. Okay, so if you were not here for that live, you might want to request the estrogen live. That was a very, very good live. The first reason is because as you move into menopause, your estrogen declines and your fat distribution moves away from your hips and thighs towards your abdominal. But because of the situation too, though, when it moves towards your central, okay, the the receptor cells and all of that in the process, there's enzymes there as well. It produces more, like I said last week, E2. Okay, oh, sorry, E1. Sorry. So you go from E2 estradiol, your normal estrogen, to more production of E1. Okay, and E1 is produced more in the fat cells and the more in the adipose tissue in the belly fat. But if you guys think about it, it's like, okay, so isn't that good? Like those of you who watched last week's live, is not necessarily. Now, E1 estrone is produced from those fat cells, okay? But E1 is a very weak signal. So it doesn't have the same receptor kind of activity as E2. And E2 is the one that helps you have good metabolism, good cortisol control, good insulin control, good metabolism, all of this type of stuff, right? So you're not having E2 back in your system. You have E1, just like I said last time. So these weaker receptor sites for E1 means your overall metabolic situation of your body is now lowered. Okay. So to help you understand that the E1 causes your body's metabolic situation to be lowered. So I'm going to map it out for you of like what's going to happen. Okay. So like kind of in a sequence. Okay. So when E2 drops, your insulin sensitivity drops because E2 estradiol is responsible for insulin sensitivity. When E2 drops, your insulin sensitivity drops and your muscle starts to decrease. And just to help you guys understand that, why? Because you need carbs and sugar in your muscle cells to produce muscle and proper muscle growth and activation. If you become insulin resistant, it means carbs cannot move into those cells, and even your muscle building responses now all drop. Now, when those two things are dropping, like so insulin sensitivity drops, muscle drops, your fat storage increases, especially in the belly, like I mentioned. As your fat storage increases, your fat tissue also increases, right? Like the fat storage, more fat tissue. Like I said last week, the aromatization process, where now the enzymes in the belly is now converting a lot of the androgen hormones to E1, the weaker estrogen. This causes a weaker metabolic support. This makes fat loss a lot harder, and then it repeats, and basically more fat gets distributed into the central belly area. Okay. I'm not going to go more into that because I talked about this in extent. So if you want to watch the estrogen live from last week, make sure you put estrogen live or go rewatch it if you have the link, because it's one of the main reasons. Okay, so with the estrogen shift, this is one of the reasons why you are seeing more belly fat there. Now, the second reason that your belly fat is increasing is also, they're all connected. Okay, they're all connected in a system, but it relates to, you have age related muscle loss. So this reduces glucose disposal capacity, meaning again, your body doesn't have the ability to take up the glucose into the muscles. So your body has less places to put the sugar. It doesn't have all those sites it used to have in your body with your muscles and other areas. The glucose has really a lot less places in your body, so it goes to your midsection. So because of the loss of muscle, then your body also has less sites for glycogen, and then it moves to the belly. And we're going to talk about the receptors of this and why this happens. But because of decreased muscle, this is one of the reasons you are going to start to see more increase in belly fat. Okay, and thus why training and muscle training is super important, and why I also say functional training very good, but there's a difference between exercising and building muscle. I said this before. There's a difference between exercising and building muscle. Think about this way: if you exercise, you move your joints, good, you get blood flow through your body. But if you don't actually produce more muscle density and tissues, you still do not have the sponges for those glucose that you need. This is why I say building muscle is very crucial as you age, and be careful about just exercising to exercise or HIIT or CrossFit or things like that. I'm not saying CrossFit, you can build a lot of strength, but it's not the same as hypertrophy training. That's why I'm very pro hypertrophy training, about building the size, the depots for the glucose. Okay, so that's something I want you to understand. Debbie, you said need to get back to muscle building. Correct. Hypertrophy training, because she's a dancer and I'm a dancer. Dancing's great. It keeps you lean for sure, because your cardio, you're moving, but it doesn't necessarily produce more depots for your glucose. So I want you guys to keep this in mind. The third reason that your visceral fat is going to start to increase is insulin resistance tends to increase with age, and excess adiposity. So insulin resistance starts to go up. Okay, we're going to go into why insulin resistance increases after E2 drops. Okay, so we're going to go into some science here. Okay, so E2 normally supports insulin sensitivity. Okay, so E2 estradiol helps glucose enter the muscle cells. Okay, it supports your GLUT4 activity, which I know Shoni talked about, which is your glucose transporter. This is the regular estrogen, and it improves how your body handles carbs. So when E2 drops, your glucose uptake drops, your blood sugar stays elevated longer. And this is very crucial for you to understand. So your blood sugar level stays elevated longer, and now insulin has to work harder, right? Does everybody understand the mechanism of that? When sugar stays in your system longer, your body gets a signal that it must produce more insulin. So the problem is, if your body is constantly overproducing insulin, your body eventually malfunctions. The cells stop responding to the insulin. And as you get into prediabetes or diabetes, you stop producing insulin. So we want insulin to work, but not work too hard. But the problem is the drop of E2 forces insulin to now work harder. Okay. So why is this really important? Okay. So visceral fat is very sensitive to insulin. So visceral fat has a high insulin responsiveness for storage. So you have to remember this. So now the sugar or whatever you're eating in your body is staying in your bloodstream. Your body's like, I need to push more insulin into the system because sugar is staying in the bloodstream and we need to help it right now, right? And then you have like a lot of insulin in the system. Okay, you guys all understand that? A lot of insulin in the system. And guess what? The visceral fat area is like, hello, we're gonna accept the insulin responsiveness. We're gonna take it. Come on, like, because your body has to somehow figure out what to do with all the sugar and whatnot. Now, the visceral fat area is very responsive to insulin for storage. Okay, you guys hear that? Insulin in the in the visceral fat, there's a high insulin responsiveness for storage. So the visceral fat area is ready to store for you. Okay, so that's why if you don't really understand how to eat and you have a belly fat, this is why one of the things is you need to understand how food works. Jacqueline, you can ask her, or even I just said to Kat even a little bit like, just be a little careful about these food things with this, because preferentially her body's wanting to put it there. I would rather she cleans up some of those things. So that's why I think you need to know how food needs to come together and what causes more insulin spike. Okay, so before I continue, I want the ones who are listening, if you want to better understand how to control insulin, put insulin control, because this is one of the factors that regular fitness industry will never talk about. It's about decreasing calories, working out harder, whatever, but not many people are going to talk about, no, you need to control insulin better. That is one of the keys. So put insulin control there. It also relates to why, Kat, I mentioned a few things in your food, right? So put insulin control if you feel like you need to understand that better. So, okay, so now the third, hold on here, I think, I just want to make sure. Yes, so the fourth thing that we want to talk about is cortisol and insulin combination. Okay, so if anything, I'm going to get very sciencey even later into this live, and you take nothing else from this live, you must take this fourth point into account. Then you're going to understand why your belly fat is so difficult to lose. And for all my clients, you will know why I coach you a certain way. Okay. Number 4 is about cortisol and insulin combination, the two of them together. Okay. Visceral fat has not only more insulin sensitivity for storage, but visceral fat also has more cortisol receptors. That means the receptors in your visceral fat is more sensitive to stress signals. So when you combine the two of them together, insulin and cortisol together, this is the strongest signal for your body to be like, put fat on in her middle. Okay, it is the combination between insulin and cortisol together that is forcing, I don't know if the word is forcing, but creates the pathways that is for putting on fat in the middle.
If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe. Listening on Spotify, tap that 5-star rating. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, please leave a quick review. It really helps the show reach more women.
So think of it like this. Belly fat, the primary reason for as you age in menopause is belly fat is where insulin and stress signals meet. So if you take nothing else from this live, as I get more detailed and I'll talk about receptor sites and all the stuff that a lot of people are like, wow, I need to listen to your live multiple times to understand. I want you to just think about this. Whatever is in the fitness industry that talks about lower calories or like, just like, just do the right macros. Macros has a lot to do with it, but it's not so simple. And if I had to make it more specific for menopausal women, in order to drop your belly fat, you must understand how to control both insulin response as well as cortisol response. The two combination together is why you need someone, a menopausal specialist who actually understands the two interaction, because that's actually a large signaling depot for your belly to get the fat in there. So, um, I see the insulin control. What I would say is I'm going to call it the belly fat solution, because if you can understand, the belly fat solution is about both understanding insulin and cortisol and the interaction between the two. If you actually ask Kat, her body's different, and her workout program has a lot of things. I'm making her control her cortisol. Is that correct, Kat? I make you control your cortisol. If Meg and Dave is on here, she also, like I said, she just started parts of my workout, but I was asking her about her body because she was saying she felt really stressed, and she's not approved for the pre-workout, but she was taking pre-workout. And I had to go in and talk about this, because what is she doing? She's spiking her cortisol. And so a lot of things, even if Meg watches this live, she'll be like, yeah, I know, she told me because of the cortisol, I need to control this. So a lot of things I speak about is all based around cortisol and insulin control. Okay. So if you are like curious about like, how do I help my belly fat drop more permanently? Of course, there's nothing permanent, because if you change your strategy or you don't follow through, then it's not permanent. But when I say you truly understand what to do, is understanding how these hormones interact. So I want you to put belly fat solution below if you are like, I need to understand the way, how to counteract both of these hormones together. I would call it the belly fat solution. Okay, the belly fat solution. So put belly fat below. Okay, belly fat solutions. Now, number 5, I already talked about this, but the loss of E2 forces a change in the fat distribution pattern. So your fat moves from hips and thighs, like I said, subcutaneous, to into the abdominal region in the visceral fat. And the loss of E2 basically means that in relation again to androgen hormones, because everybody has estrogen and androgen hormones, that as your estrogen drops, your androgen hormones go up, and your visceral fat area has slightly more, androgenic receptors. Okay, so it's not that you have like super high androgen hormones, but it's always in ratio to each other. So as E2 drops, your androgen levels rise, and so if it kind of signals to the brain, it needs to go to the center, right? I see the belly fat solutions, Marie, Pam, and Angela. Yes, we see that. So yes, we'll connect with you. So that's the 5 reasons. Those are the 5 reasons that central fat is, after 40, is so complicated, because there's a lot of things that are happening. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about why visceral fat is called an endocrine organ. Okay, so not only is all those reasons I gave you complex in the reason why visceral fat will deposit, but you also need to know that an adipose tissue in your belly fat area is not a passive storage. It actively secretes cytokines, chemokines, coagulation related molecules, and free fatty acids that influence liver, muscles, blood vessels, pancreas, and your brain. Now, a lot of you will be like, oh my gosh, that just went over my head. I'm going to break it down for you so you better understand what's actually happening in the visceral fat area. Okay, so 19 eyeballs. I'm going to just check here because I'm not always looking over here. So we have, Oh, yes, all the ones I already said, Kamiko, Pam, Sharice. We have Chiquita. Thanks for joining. Jane, Veronica, good to see you. Mimi, and Stephanie. Yes, awesome. Um, so let's talk a little bit about when I say the visceral fat secretes cytokines, chemokines, coagulation related molecules. What do I mean? Okay, so we're going to start with cytokines. Okay, cytokines are inflammation signals. These are small proteins that act like messages between the cell. They tell the body when to activate inflammation. So when you're sick, I'm just saying, for example, I could feel my throat and it's very sore. My body's going like, I need you to activate and, like bring in those people to help fight whatever she has. It's good, but it's not good when it is too many of them, because when you activate inflammation in the body to try to kill off the invaders, but you keep having too much of it, then your whole body has chronic inflammation. Now, I know some of you may know about the unfortunate situation in New York and the plane crash and all of that. And I know that, if you don't know, but, two pilots, passed away because of the plane hitting the fire truck. Okay. And, condolences goes out to the pilots and as well as I think it was 79 passengers on that flight into New York. But I want to use this example because I think it's very relevant. Okay. I like analogies to help you guys better understand this. Okay. The thing I want you to think about the cytokines is, if you think about it, cytokines are like the air traffic control signals. They're talking to each other across the air traffic control, this talking to that one and this one talking to that one. In a normal situation, we are grateful for this air traffic control. We need them. We need the signals properly. But as you could see in the situation that happened, when there's a lot of things happening and too many signals are going back and forth between the towers and it's unclear, there's a lot of signals coming through, then too many tower signals interfering with kind of like the process, the standard process is going to have problems. So this is the first thing I want you to think about is, like, if we use the same analogy because it kind of is more, it's real, that had happened. If the towers have too many conflicting signals or all of that, which is your cytokines, then we're going to have problems. So you want to think about your visceral fat is sending out a lot of cytokine information. And a little bit in your body is okay, but when it's too much, we're going to have a problem with too many signals and different messages between the towers. We're going to run into problems. Okay. The second thing is your visceral fat also secretes chemokines, not just cytokines, but chemokines. Now I want you to think about the chemokines as the reinforcement that comes out to help. So I want you to think in the situation of this particular plane crash, they had to dispatch the fire truck onto the airplane field to try to get to the other airplane, the reinforcement, the truck that has to come out. Okay. So the chemokine is like the truck that has to come out. Okay. So the problem, so like the chemokines in a good situation is good because it's going to help you. Okay. But what's going to happen if there is too many, again, it's just an example, there's too many confusion, or the chemokines are not like, as in, like, just imagine there's a lot of fire trucks on the tarmac kind of thing. We're going to have a big problem, and we probably are going to have a lot of crashes that are going to start to happen. This is just an analogy. Okay. So if these fire trucks on a normal basis are supposed to help your body, but too many fire trucks on the airplane tarmac, we're going to see a lot of crashes. Okay. So I want you to think about, we have the cytokines, the chemokines. In a normal body, they do what its job well. But when it is not proper, then these things start to, if you guys know the whole situation, you're going to have airplane crashing into the fire truck. There's going to be major things happening. And as and like I said, it is a very sad situation that happened. But I want you to think about this. This is kind of happening in a lot of your bodies. Yeah, you have a lot of signals that are confusing between the towers. You have a lot of chemokines and fire trucks in the area, in your visceral fat area, that should not be there, that is causing poor signaling and all of that. Does this make sense? First of all, I just want you guys to just like tell me, like, do you guys understand what I'm saying here in terms of the analogy? Okay, just so that you guys can not get too overwhelmed with science, but you can actually get the analogy of what I'm saying. Does this make sense? So put that below. Now, there's a third, I said, a coagulation related molecules that your visceral fat secretes. Okay, so the coagulation related molecules, coagulation means blood clotting signals. Good, Pam, I'm glad it makes sense. Yes. And if you don't know the whole situation about the New York, then you might not get it. But if you are been following that, then you know that it makes a lot of sense what I'm saying. And Angela says yes. So coagulation related molecules relate to blood clotting. So these affect how easily your blood clots or flows, like how easily your blood clots or flows right through the body. So in excess, like with visceral fat, they increase clotting risk and affect cardiovascular health. So I already said this, but like if the runway and where the airplanes are supposed to land and everything had a lot of, whether fire trucks or a lot of blockages and stuff like that, then the airplanes would have trouble landing. So the coagulation that is being secreted by your visceral fat is causing a lot of, again, possibility of a lot of blockages and clots in your system. Okay, so this is why I always say to everybody who is, who follows me or who comes onto a consultation call with me, getting rid of visceral fat is not, I mean, it's nice. Everybody likes aesthetics. I like aesthetic. I'm a dancer. I like beautiful things. I like things to look good in the lines of the body, everything. But it is beyond that. Visceral fat is about your actual health inside, right? Oh, I know who I said that to. Joanne. Joanne has been with me for a long time in the Muscle Accelerator. And I had mentioned this to her because she's been with me a long time, but like that she's putting she's investing in herself for her actual inner health more than about aesthetics, right? Because you have to remember this: if you have visceral fat, I forget who told me they have 37.5 in their inch of their waist and stuff like that, but if you have a thicker waist, it's not even just about aesthetic, but it's about the risk factors that are there when you hold visceral fat, because of these types of signals being released out of your visceral fat, right? So you getting rid, when you lower visceral fat, you lower those signals that are being sent, and particularly with coagulation related molecules, you don't really want to have increased clotting, right? You would want to be careful about cardiovascular risk. It is also why in the hormone therapy department, I have said that if you are over 60, generally they do not recommend, going on HRT. I mean, there could be some exceptions, but because if you have more of a risk to have blood clots and things like that, and you have lowered estrogen and things like that, it just increases your risk if you take HRT too late in your life. There's more complications, more complex explanations, but this is what's happening. So remember, I said that your visceral fat actively is releasing chemokines, cytokines, as well as coagulation things. So it is a massive risk factor sitting right in the middle of your body. Okay, so you have to say, for all of you who have belly fat, to put for you, if it's for real, like, health, right? Real long-term health, put real long-term health below. It's nice to look better too, of course, but it's like the primary reason for you to get rid of that visceral fat is about your actual health, right? The next thing is, now we're going to get into more science things, is the receptor types and signaling systems that matter in visceral fat. Okay, so there's a lot of receptors in your visceral fat area, and This will help explain to you why your body responds a certain way in that visceral fat department, okay? So not every receptor that I'm going to name off is unique to visceral fat, but these are the ones most tied to your visceral adipose tissue, okay? So the first thing we're going to talk about is glucocorticoid receptors, GR. Okay, so GR glucocorticoid receptors is a major reason stress physiology matters here. So in your visceral fat, you have more of the glucocorticoid receptors. Okay, so they specifically respond to stress. Okay, so if your body has more stress in it, example, I'm going to just use Kat because she had a lot of stress and like injuries and things like that. Her midsection is like the GR receptors are really prime, and they respond very quickly to stress. So again, one of your primary things you need to remember is how I control the amount of stress in my body. Now, stress control is not, it is partly mindset, but for those of you who may not understand a number of things that causes stress, this is where I want you to be. I want you to think about this, okay? So I talk about this. The ones who are in my 14-day challenge, we are beginning to see changes partially because we are tackling like a layer one. When I say layer one stress is like inflammatory foods or foods that causes inflammation. So if you don't know your inflammatory markers that causes stress, like I said, if you don't know how your macros have to come together, that causes stress. If you don't know how much or like how your food needs to be distributed, that causes stress. If you don't know how to train or work out, that can cause stress, right? So stress comes into many forms. So this is kind of why I say, you heard me say it last time, MTP, menopausal training protocol, and MNP, which is menopausal nutrition protocol, is actually centered on stress control. Well, both insulin and stress control, but a huge part is stress control. So if you guys watched last time's live and, maybe we reached out, if you haven't, put MTP and MNP, because this is like my whole philosophy is how do you train, how do you eat in a way that controls these factors the best way possible, right?
If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe. Listening on Spotify, tap that 5-star rating. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, please leave a quick review. It really helps the show reach more women.
So, okay, so I want to talk about another receptor, okay? So, sorry, let me just see. Yeah. I see Kat saying that's right. So the next receptor we want to talk about is MR, which is mineralocorticoid receptor. Okay. So MR is also present in your adipose tissue and has been linked to adipose inflammation, oxidative stress, adipokine dysregulation, insulin resistance. Again, these are big words and people are like, I don't know, you just go over my head when you use these words. But the nice thing is I always explain more deeper and with analogies, okay? So MR, mineralocorticoid receptor, is different from glucocorticoid receptor, okay? Those are two different types, but they're connected, okay? But what I want you to think about is GR, glucocorticoid receptors, is attracted to stress signals and stress and then fat storage, glucocorticoid, okay? So when you're activated, so GR, glucocorticoid, the first one I talked about, is activated by cortisol. And it will, when it senses really high stress in your body, just like I described above, it will tell the body to store energy and increase fat in the abdominal region. It's the most direct one to put fat on is GR, glucocorticoid receptors, okay? That's really important. But what is MR? because mineralocorticoid is slightly different, but it basically it forces the tissues to become more and more unhealthy. So I'll explain this. So it's activated mainly by aldosterone, which is the hormone for regulating sodium and water in your body. It helps control blood pressure and it acts mainly in the kidney, like aldosterone, like how much sodium, potassium, all of that. It relates to blood pressure, all of this type of stuff. Okay. So when aldosterone binds to the mineralocorticoid receptors in fat tissue, it increases the inflammation in your body. It increases the oxidative stress in your body. It worsens insulin resistance and makes fat tissue more dysfunctional. So I want you to think of it like this. GR, glucocorticoid receptors, determines how much fat you store. And MR determines how healthy or unhealthy your fat tissues become. So why is this important is because the fat tissue of someone that is in their 20s or 30s is nowhere near as unhealthy as your fat tissues that are sitting in your belly right now. The fat tissues that are sitting in your belly right now are much more unhealthy fat tissue types due to the mineralocorticoid system or receptors. Okay, you have both of them working together, and they're both highly concentrated in the visceral fat area. So your GR and your MR are basically like, if you don't understand how to control stress, I see Andrew says MTP and MP, but like if you don't understand how to control stress, how to eat, how to do the right combinations, the distribution of nutrition, where you need to control maybe more carb loading, less carb loading, how to work out, how to control the stress response, your GR is going to be highly activated to pull in or cause the channels to keep pulling fat into your body, right? And then the worst part is that the MR is also responding to all of these things happening, and then it continues to make it worse, like making the whole environment unhealthy by increasing all the inflammation, oxidative stress I mentioned. So how, obviously this helps you understand, but how do you improve or reduce MR activation? Okay, so like MR activation is a part of the visceral fat game. Okay, so how do you how do you improve the environment to try to reduce MR activation? So number one, I already said this, is you have to learn about reducing cortisol so that it doesn't stimulate the MR. Okay, so you have to reduce chronic signaling through all the things I said, but partially also through recovery. So Meg, yesterday, I think she messaged me and she was telling me she was feeling very tired. She had just started my workouts. And of course, I told her today, I said, like, don't do the workout, like, don't do the workout, blah, blah, blah. I said specific things for her because when you're in menopause, you have to really focus on recovery. That's a key portion. Is that correct, Kat? We've talked a lot about recovery. You have to focus on recovery. And that's a missing element for a lot of menopausal women is recovery protocols. And that is one of the things that can really help with the visceral fat area. So number one, reduce chronic stress, improve recovery. Number two, you need to improve insulin sensitivity. So that means we need to stabilize metabolic signaling and reduce inflammatory pathways. So again, big words that you're probably like, oh, she's saying so many big words, I can't handle it. Okay. But I always try to make you guys understand it more from your perspective. Okay. Improving insulin sensitivity means you need to understand how much protein you're supposed to have, what type of strength training you need to have, and the amount and types and balance of carbs. Okay, so that is in your layman's term. In order for you to improve your insulin sensitivity, you need to know how much protein you need to have, the right types of strength training, and balancing the right types of carbs in your system. And if you're listening to this, you're like, I don't really understand how that all works together. This is why you need MNP, which is Menopausal Nutrition Protocol, because a 14-day challenge hits a first level, but it doesn't hit all the other levels of the amount of proteins, where your strength training comes in, and how to balance the different types of carbs, right? So like in Kat's situation, she's allowed more carbs because she has a generally healthy metabolic system, even though she may not feel like it. But yes, you have a overall healthier metabolic system. So I let her have different values of carbs versus a 𝗔𝗰𝗵𝗶𝗃𝗃𝗏. Okay, so again, if you're listening, you're like, how do I improve insulin sensitivity? This is what I'm saying here is you have to understand where these aspects go. And if you don't know, that's where MNP comes in. Okay, so I want you to put MNP if you are like, this is what I need this. And honestly, if you can get a handle on this, it's so much better than just like, I need to reduce eating, I need to like eat less, or like, I just need to like, I don't know, drink more protein shake. Like these things that are like surface level solutions are kind of keeping you stuck. You need to learn how these nutrition things work together, right? So put MNP below if you're like, I really need better understanding of this. Now, before I keep going, and this is obviously all my lives are very intense, I'd like to hear from all of you listening. What is it that you're really learning today? What are you learning? Because I love to hear what are you taking away from today's live. What are you learning that you're like, oh my gosh, never thought about it this way, or the way you explain it this way? Like, what are you taking away from this live? Put it below. As a midpoint reflection so you're not completely lost in all the big words that I'm using. What are you learning right now about yourself, about the belly fat that you have? Put it below. So the next thing I wanna is still talking about the solutions is you have to manage sodium and potassium balance. Now, this particular portion is a little bit more advanced. If you don't really understand the sodium potassium balancing, it's going to be hard to kind of figure this out, but it's like an advanced strategy you can use to help belly fat and how much sodium potassium is involved in your situation. So, but just the best way I can say is like, if you eat more natural foods, like the food in your environment that is natural, like nature has a way of naturally balancing everything. Correct? You guys agree? Like when you look at nature, it just has this beautiful way of balancing everything. So if you think more like you are able to eat more natural, more things that are like cat, like I said, let's go for more natural starch carbs there, like because if you understand how the natural parts of like food works, you without me going to a lot of details about like the balancing, the sodium, the potassium, there's all type of stuff, you already are in a better track. Okay, so that's another solution. Number 4 is improving sleep. So if you don't have good sleep, you will have more cortisol dysregulation, and you will activate more MR activity indirectly. Okay, so sleep is going to be super important. And then, of course, number 5 is you must learn to build muscle. Muscle reduces inflammation. It improves metabolic environment and reduces fat-driven signaling. So again, you just have to ask yourself, okay, for all of you that are training right now, are you really seeing differences in your body? Are you really seeing more muscle build, more muscle gain in your body? Strength and muscle building is slightly two different things. Strength, like a power lifter, has more motor recruitment of the fibers immediately. Like at one time, it recruits all the motor units together to produce a massive force. That doesn't necessarily, it can be connected. Again, this is a little bit complicated. It doesn't necessarily mean you have more muscle. You've created more sarcoplasmic increase and all of this. So who here, if I was to ask everyone that's listening, is able to identify, like, are you building more muscle? Say yes, building more muscle, or no, not building more muscle. Are you building more muscle? Are you building more muscle? Because that's going to tell you something about what, is happening inside your body in response to a lot of the visceral fat types things, right? So keep in mind how you're training. It's not to put down the other types of workouts, because they all have a certain thing. And it's not that, like, because you could technically argue, like, well, powerlifters are really strong and Olympic lifters are really strong, so they do build muscle. That's true. But it's like like they cross over into each other. Like, there is some muscle gain in those things, but is that the primary thing? Is strength the same as like hypertrophy training? And obviously when you study into though, they're not exactly the same. So that's all I'm saying. It's not to, like, I have people who do both. They can do, I think with Jane is like, you can do strength training and powerlifting. You can do both. It's okay. But it's just understanding, like, are you stuck going to the gym and doing these group classes where you feel like you're doing something, but it really isn't, and it's not improving the situation of your belly? That's what I'm trying to get you to think about. Anything I say, sometimes I am a little hesitant because you could take it out of context. Like, somebody could come to me and say, like, so you're saying Olympic lifters and power lifters don't build muscle? That's not true. They can build muscle, and depends how they train. But the main focus, as you guys can see, if you visually look at a bodybuilder versus a powerlifter, an Olympic lifter, there is a difference in their type of body. So that's all I'm saying. But they can cross over, or if they cross train, they can still have those types of results. So I don't want to, because if somebody like pro listens to my live, they're gonna like nail me, right? They're like, well, and also trying to be fair in all respects. So you have to take what I say in context, and that there could be differences in how everybody trains. Okay. Now, yes, Angela, please do my workouts. Okay. It's going to make a big difference, especially for you wanting a better response in your belly. Okay. So, and then the next few, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I'll name them off, because I've already gone into a lot of these. But in your belly fat, you also have estrogen receptors, which I already talked about. So we already know, because of the estrogen receptors, but the different type of estrogen it produces, it affects how your body responds. E1 is not going to be as strong as E2. We already talked about that. Another receptor is androgen receptors. I also talked about this earlier. So the adipose tissues also expresses androgen receptor signaling, which affects where the fat deposits, right? So we already talked about this. So estrogen receptors also sits in your belly fat. Androgen receptor sits into the belly fat. And then we have insulin receptors, right? So in your visceral fat, adipocytes respond strongly to insulin, okay? Like I said before. So in a healthy individual, your insulin helps regulate lipid storage and suppress excess lipolysis, okay? Like, it helps regulate the fat and everything. In kind of a dysfunctional state, the insulin receptor, it increases free fatty acid spillover. Okay, so it, like, the free fatty acid spillover worsens systematic metabolic disease. So again, the insulin receptor things that I talked about earlier, they're very active within the visceral fat. So again, just like Pam said, understanding how to control insulin is very crucial. Okay. There is also something called beta androgenic receptors. Okay. Beta androgenic receptors in the visceral fat mediate catecholamine signaling and lipolysis. Catecholamine are things like epinephrine and like adrenaline and things like that. And they mediate, lipolysis means the breakdown of fats, right? So these receptors are relevant because stress and sympathetic signaling, they influence how your fat tissues behave. So you're like, the best way to explain it is like, just it's not going to respond as well like before, when your visceral fat is increasing. It's not responding as well to the fat lipolysis, fat breakdown, all of this. Like I said, it's similar to it's more complex, but like it's kind of like before you can easily break down fats, but now you cannot break down fats as much. Before, your beta androgenic receptors can respond to, let's say, high adrenaline, different things like that, and it can respond well, but now it cannot respond as well. And then that cortisol causes problems within the visceral fat. Another thing, in terms of receptors within the visceral fat, you have a local cortisol amplifying enzyme. And I'm not going to name it off, it's a very long name, but this particular local cortisol amplifying enzyme regenerates active cortisol from inactive cortisone within the tissues, including adipose tissue. So in your fat cells, or in the visceral fat, you already have more GR situation, glucocorticoid activation in your belly fat, okay? But you have an enzyme in there, which is making it worse. It takes your inactive cortisone and turns it into active cortisol, okay? So I want you guys to think about this. It's like, darn it, everything I do is not helping. Everything in my body is turning things into cortisol. So this makes it even more crucial that you are very cautious of controlling cortisol on multiple fronts. This is why I always say to all the ladies that I coach, be very careful what activities you do, what's your exercise protocols going to entail, how you eat. Do you eat in the morning? How much coffee you drink? Are you taking a pre-workout, Meg? You know that I was on you for that. What, like, all the things that you guys are doing, there's a lot of things that you never think, and like that is forcing this whole situation worse. So this is why you want again, you guys already caught it, I already said it, you need your protocol as a menopausal woman, especially if you have a lot of visceral fat, is you need MNP and MTP, and within that is understanding the control of insulin and cortisol. Okay. Yes, so those are all the different receptors. There's I named off, I think, 5 or 6 of those receptors, or more than that, I think. But there's a lot of receptors in your visceral fat that makes it really, really difficult. Yeah. So now I am going to talk a little bit about what inflammatory molecules visceral fat releases. Now, there's a lot of them. And honestly, there's a lot of different names that I'm not going to be able to name off all. I'll just name off some examples, okay? Specifically in your visceral fat will excrete interleukin 6, TNF alpha, interleukin 1 beta, MCP1, interleukin 8, a whole bunch, there's more, and resistant leptin, adiponectin, these things that all forces more inflammation situation in your body. So that's why visceral fat is like this constant cycle, right? The more visceral fat you have, the more inflammatory signals and fewer protective signals you have. So I want you to think about this as some examples. Interleukin 6 and TNF alpha are key inflammatory cytokines linked to impaired insulin signaling. Do you remember, everyone on here, that I once said if you have belly fat, you by nature have inflammation in your system? Does everybody remember that? If you have belly fat, you by nature have inflammation in your system. You guys remember? This is one of the reasons. Okay, so visceral fat itself produces interleukin 6, TNF alpha, and these inflammatory cytokines linked to your impaired insulin signaling. If you have belly fat, you are likely insulin resistant. I had said that before. So you are already not doing too well with insulin. Okay, MCP1, that particular inflammatory molecule helps recruit more macrophages into the fat tissue, which amplifies inflammation. So it further makes it worse. Okay. that particular one. A PAI1, this particular inflammatory molecule, it links visceral fat to basically higher cardiovascular risk. And then adiponectin usually falls as visceral fat rises, which adiponectin actually protects you. It protects you from I guess protects you to be more insulin sensitive. But if you don't have adiponectin as well, then you're going to become more insulin resistant. And adiponectin decreases as these inflammatory molecules increase. Okay, so there's a lot there. I'm again, like I said, if it's too sciencey, you can skip over that. But it's just to help you understand that a lot of visceral fat, a lot of inflammatory molecules are being excreted in your visceral fat section. So if for my own clients who listen a lot, obviously when I coach them, sometimes you'll be like, oh, why doesn't she's saying this particular food or this particular food, or like I'm like kind of in the middle on some foods, is because I'm understanding the pathways behind that food in your system. And that for a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old, it may be totally okay because you're like, oh, but I never had problems with this food before, or like so and so on IG looks like super fit and she's eating that, type of thing. That's what I want you to understand is like, because your body is having all of these different pathways producing more inflammation than normal, you just cannot eat the same way. You just have to be more conscious. And I even said this once, I think, to Kat long time ago, but I said, like, while she was in her phase 1 of dropping her belly fat in the first program, I had not allowed her to have certain things, and then later on I allowed her to have it. So as you become better, and let's say your visceral fat drops off and you become more metabolically healthy, you can afford a lot more different kinds of foods and nutrition protocols. But you have to know, when do you introduce more of this type of food and when do you lower other types of food. So again, I want all of you to, I mean, it's probably the same eyeballs on here, but if there's anybody new, is like, again, MNP is the best way I can say it. Menopausal nutrition protocol. You have to be very aware of what foods can be allowed for you at this point and what foods are not. And it is not a diet, okay? It's not a diet. It's not like, I want you to reduce so that you lose weight. What I want you to be aware is these foods could cause inflammation, or these foods has a certain effect in your microbiome, and that microbiome leads to more inflammation in your gut system, and we need to decrease the inflammation in your gut system so that you have better response in your body, right? Like, it's more complicated. So again, if you're listening and you're like, I just need help with this nutrition side or MNP, I want you to put MNP below. Okay. Yes, and the last thing, we're going to wrap up here. The last thing is just kind of, again, outlining the pathway a little bit. Okay, so I want you to think about it this way: is the cascade effect. Okay, if you are aging and you're going into menopause, you will for sure have a decrease in E2, which means you have a decrease in muscle in your body. That decrease in muscle leads to more central fat storage. More central fat storage, because of the receptor sites we talked about, means more visceral fat. More visceral fat means more inflammatory cytokines and free fatty acids and aromatization processes. More inflammatory cytokines means more liver stress, more insulin resistance, and worse blood sugar control. And more fat storage also means less muscle support and increase in cardiovascular risk. Now, I named off a lot, but if you actually wrote that out, you'll see a whole chain effect that's actually happening. And this chain is very well supported across many pieces of literature in the science research department of this is exactly what happens in your visceral fat area. Okay. So I'm going to basically, wrap it up by saying, if you want a flatter stomach after 40, the goal is not to lose fat. The goal is to reduce the specific fat depot that is acting like a disruptive hormone and inflammatory organ inside your body. I want you guys to catch that, okay? I'm going to say again, the goal is not to lose weight. The goal is to reduce the specific fat depot that is acting like a disruptive hormone and inflammatory organ inside the body. I have many women who come to me and say, I'm not really overweight. No, I'm actually quite lean. I'm really lean in my arms, my legs. And then I ask them, but do you have belly fat? And they're like, yes, right? So it has little to do with weight. I've seen very skinny people. I've seen lean people who still have a belly. And so the key is to drop the fat depot. So if you're like committed to dropping your visceral fat, put visceral fat below, because that is the fat depot you have to drop. Okay. If you're committed to dropping the visceral fat, put visceral fat below. Okay. And as you guys come in and put that response, like you need to commit to dropping the visceral fat. The strategy will have to be muscle focus, insulin smart, recovery focus, and cortisol control. And that's why it's a multi-chain effect and it's very complex. And I will end with this one thing for those of you who follow your belly fat protocol. What I summarize visceral fat in a very detailed way in today's live, okay? But your protocols will change based on what your tendency of belly fat type is. And if you guys watch my 6 types of belly fat shapes, okay, you will know what I mean. Meaning, if you have more cortisol dominance in your belly, so everyone I can tell is something different. Like Tracy Norman is mainly cortisol dysregulation, and we can control that. She does really well, and she looks great with muscle. Kamiko was mainly cortisol, slightly not understanding where her carbs needed to go for her belly. Tammy Linton and Jackie Bertrand, Leslie Bennett, all of these are Tammy Linton as well as Jackie Bertrand are insulin resistant bellies with other ones on top. So the hardest, so there's a different protocol. Leslie Bennett is mainly estrogen dominance. So if you can understand that there's different types and levels of hormones that showcase itself onto your belly, yes, in general, you have to understand the way the visceral fat operates as this like own endocrine system. But within that endocrine system, you have to understand what are your levels. Are you more cortisol? Are you more estrogen dominant? Are you more insulin resistant? Are you just lacking a whole bunch of muscle tone in your belly, in your body, muscle tone? Are you, right? These impact the strategy we're going to use to help you get a flat stomach. Okay, because the goal, everybody, is to get you a flat stomach and one that you can maintain for the rest of your life. So this is the biggest thing I want you guys to understand. So hopefully this helps you have a better understanding, helps you guys understand that yes, belly fat is extremely hard to drop, but it is possible with the right protocols. Okay. Yes, I'm glad my voice lasted through all of this. I'm sending you all lots of love, and we'll talk to many of you on the SMS. Okay, see you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fierce and Fit Mentor podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit the follow button on Spotify, subscribe on YouTube, or wherever you're listening so you never miss an episode. If something in this episode resonated with you, please leave a review or share it with a friend who'd love it too. Your support means the world and helps us reach more amazing women like you. Until next time, stay fierce, stay fit, and let's keep building your most powerful self.